All right. Hey, what's up, guys? Could you give a reaction if you hear me? Is the audio okay? Wait, is the audio okay? Okay, good. So, this is going to be recorded. So, if you want to go ahead and watch later, you can do that. So, just to give an introduction as to what the space is going to be, this is going to be called Ukraine 2027. It's the halfway to digital 2030. If you want to know what I'm talking about, take a quick look at my timeline. It's a reference to Mikhailo Fedorov, who is the Minister of Digital Transformation for Ukraine, who put out this absolutely, insane fantasy world, Wakanda fantasy of Ukraine in 2030 and how they will be the most advanced digital economy in the world. Trying something akin to Estonia for a country the size of Poland wouldn't work, especially a country that is the only country in the world since 1991 to have a smaller economy in real GDP terms than it did earlier. So even every Soviet economy post-Soviet economy, Russia, Belarus, the ones that struggled, even they are bigger, and other countries that struggled, even they are bigger. It is the sole country in the world that has a GDP smaller. So. This space is going to look at a few aspects where we are today. I'm going to give a quick overview, and the big point is to take a look. Okay, where is this going? Because you know, I think many of us can doom, and I think many of us can also be a little too optimistic. But I think the important thing to listen to is that the reason why Team War Criminal is so confident in the end of the war is because there are so many aspects. So the main aspects we're going to talk about is the developments at the front, the economic situations, the demographic situations, and then the overview of the material that Ukraine has. So war material, tanks, planes, artillery, ammunition, so on. And lastly, we will touch on mobilization. To quickly recap the overview of the situation at the front. Um, well, the war started out obviously as a complete mess for the Russians. They did one half a real war, one half a political hybrid war, which of course failed. Which then started quote unquote SMO Part 2, which was, okay, let's do this war for real in the Donbass. And as we know, that went very well. In the very first few months, let's say April to July, they captured Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Popasnaya, and they were looking unstoppable. However, it was a ticking time bomb. They had far too few troops, and Kharkov happened, and then they had to pull out of Kherson to save the situation. However, ever since they mobilized, they knew that the Ukrainians were going to get more stuff and would go on the counteroffensive. So they, of course, sent Wagner to kind of distract them in the meantime, have them waste some stuff, get ready for the counteroffensive. They, of course, destroyed the counteroffensive. And then ever since the 10th of October 2023, it's been the initiative ever since. And, when we are looking at long-term aspects, we still have to look at where we are in terms of the war. And it's very difficult to talk about this stuff because, I've been watching some analysis videos. There's this one, I think, Swedish guy, Anders something on YouTube. He's saying, well, initially switch back and forth, back and forth. That's not how a war works. First off, it takes pure idiocracy, and what the side does with the initiative is quite important. What Russia has done with the initiative, the most important thing it has done ever since 10th of October, in my opinion, there's a few important things, but the most important thing that is done, it is pushed Ukrainians out from the outskirts of Donetsk. So instead of it being a 9 kilometer distance to the center of Donetsk, it's now at minimum at 17, and that's over in the void over by Nivoskuli. So in reality, most of it, to the north and northeast, it's been pushed out upwards of 27 kilometers. And this is very important because when we're looking for long-term aspects, how far is Ukraine from its potential goals and where it is very important, whether they will get funding, whether the morale will be there. And so overall, the fact that they are about to lose their transit hub in Pakrovsk, or maybe not lose it, but have it within FPV and shelling range, is very, very, very important for the long-term aspects. Because if we're talking about the defense of Donetsk Oblast, yes, in totality, Russia still needs to take 10,000 square kilometers, which is a lot. It's because think about it. Ever since 10th of October, they've taken about 1,100 to 1,200 square kilometers, which does seem like a lot, but they need to take 10 times that amount. And Pokrovsk is very vital to making sure that the pace doesn't accelerate, because it's the rail line directly from Dnipropetrovsk, or Dnipro was called now. So the fact that they're losing is quite difficult. But now let's not dwell on this. Let's also look at the economic situation. So a quick overview of where we are up to now. Of course, the war started. Exports fell down the drain. They are at a fraction where they are. Metallurgical production, which was their second largest industry, is approximately 20 to 30% of the size, even with a somewhat bounce back effect. Their GDP is overall still a quarter smaller, and the growth that they've experienced in 23-24 is, of course, growth on top of what they collapsed in 22, but it's not going to come back ever to the levels of 2021. And the big thing here is, why did it fall so much? Well, yes, of course, war started destruction, but the big thing, and this is a good transition, is that a lot of people left. And when more people leave, it's very, very, very obvious what happens. Less people are paying taxes, less people are doing jobs, there's less industry, people have to be shuffled around, and then it gets compounded by the fact that men of working age specifically have to move into roles, and many young teenagers, 15 through 18, are leaving the country. Left the country at the time but the start of the war. So now when you need these young guys, kind of to be apprentices in the metallurgical factories, or be working in some kind of public works, maybe manning, doing some work at a hydroelectric plant, they're not there. And this, of course, has a little bit of a cascading effect. It cascades to other areas. So overall, even though it's nominally only 25% down, it's a lot more, because, as we know, they are being propped up. Over half their budget is completely financed. And in reality, if you want to take a look at my previous space, there is some belief that they are lying about how much tax revenue they get, and that is actually really just extra foreign funding that they are just shuffling around, and they're kind of fudging the numbers for creditors and for outside parties. But in reality, it's the situation is probably, I would guess, 60-70% of the budget is funded outside. So that's that. And taking a look at the demographic situation. Overall, it's important to know that there are no solid numbers, but in 2020, there was what's called an e-census, which is where they measured stuff, looking at many records, electronic records, and overall the population in the areas controlled by the Ukrainian government. So this was prior to the special military operations, so minus Crimea, Sevastopol, and Dinar LNR, the population was a little over 37 million. However, this also included people who do seasonal work in Poland, which was upwards of a little over a million. And keep in mind that many people, I'm sure, guys, you've seen this in your own countries. Um, in you've seen this that right before the SMO, that many people left, and so I actually sent a few emails, including to the head of the Demographic Institute in Ukraine, Ellen Lyubinova, and overall, the number believed at the start of the war under Ukrainian control is between 35.5 to 36 million. When considering the mass exodus at the start, considering the continuous exodus, the population now is likely 29 million. However, this is only getting worse because there's many things that are happening. One, men are being sent to the front. That's one aspect. Two, many men are secretly leaving. The number officially is upwards of 3,000 men a week try to leave, but it's likely higher, but we'll call it 3,000 men a week. So, about 150, 160,000 men. And also, additionally, many women and children are still leaving. The Ukrainian government officially, in their inflation report, predicted an extra 700,000 from today or the time of the report by the end of 2025. In reality, that'll be probably higher, but we can confidently say by the end of 2025 that it will be less than 28 million. And so, how does that affect mobilization? Well, when it comes to mobilization, it's very difficult to talk about because you have to take a look at who they can actually mobilize. A lot of people in the beginning of the war very foolishly said, well, Ukraine's actually mobilized very few people because the number was in the thousands, it wasn't in the millions or something like that. That is a very foolish way to look at it because a country cannot mobilize so many people because you still need to run some services. You still need people working. You still, and especially in times of war, even with the outrageous amount of foreign funding that's coming in, everything costs money to mobilize, to even go through the process, get the guys out, send out the men, that costs money. To every single guy is, X dollars per day, and this all adds up. So in reality, generally, across wars, the accepted number is 30%. Once you've mobilized 30% of the mobilizable pool, things are going to really accelerate into shit. Right now, we are at minimum 15% because they've mobilized over 1 million men. And we made that calculation. It's on my timeline. Me and Kinez, we made that calculation. I'm going to say now with the additional mobilization pool, we are likely at 20%. And if we look at losses, well, losses are quite hard to determine, but I've been looking at this quite frequently. We know Ukrainians themselves admitted in the Russia report that there was 30K dead in just the first 10 months of 2022, and there was additionally another report talking about how every 14th soldier, so about 60-something thousand cases of desertion. Of course, many of those guys get caught and all that stuff. But as you can see, the irrecoverable number is almost certainly over 200,000 by now. And realistically, it could be I think it could be as high as 300,000, depending on your definition of irrecoverable. And so we're going to talk about that number in the context of 2027 later. And lastly, let's take a look really briefly at the material status. So before the war, Ukraine had a fairly large arsenal. We all know that. They had about 1,000 tanks, primarily T-64, but also some T-80, T-72. They had IFVs, BMP-1, 2. They have their BTR-3, 4s. And for artillery, they had pretty much similar systems to what the Russians had, but in much smaller numbers. Um, and for planes, they had about 100, 150, somewhere there. Well, the war has been going on. Of course, the West has been sending a lot of material. Ukraine right now loses about 1.1 tanks per day, so they're at about, I would say, about 1,000 losses. They've had 650 sent, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, what exactly that all means. So let's move on to, that was 2024. Let's move on to what exactly this all means for 2027. Well, unless Ukraine can retake the initiative, the pace of the Russian advance in 2027 will probably mean they will be hitting the Dnieper River, moving through Dnipropetrovsk, because honestly, it's quite likely this year they can even take Pokrovsk, or maybe be threatening to take it. So moving through Dnipropetrovsk, if you look at the terrain, is much easier. So that will severely, severely hamper the already existing issues, because Dnipropetrovsk is actually the richest area right now of Ukraine. By salaries is Kyiv, the capital, but if we take a look at resources, that used to be Donetsk, but now with Donetsk absolutely devastated, and most of the useful areas under the control of the DNR, that has really become Dnipropetrovsk. And if they allow this to keep going and not stop this, well, now you're going to lose Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporozhye. And Zaporozhye is essentially where the biggest Ukrainian company is now headquartered, Metinvest. And a lot of their metallurgical industry, including Zaporozhye Stal, is located there. So if they do not cede to Russia some kind of deal, they will be getting hit there. And even if we don't believe that, right? Even if we're going to just take a look at the economic situation, 2027 is a year of reckoning for Ukraine. What do I mean by a year of reckoning? Well, if you look at all the funding, the recent EU $50 billion, the IMF programs, all of that is coming to a head in 2027. To 2024, we recently heard about the deal with the Eurobond holders, and that was very, very, very shaky for Ukraine. Of course, they were able to weasel out, kind of, but not fully. Not fully. And they weren't able to get a deal on their GDP warrants, which is, by the way, guys, that was the GDP warrants. Let me just quickly explain in a very simple way. I might be oversimplifying, but just so you guys understand, before the war, Ukraine had all these outstanding loans. This was an issue even before 2014. Ukraine has always been a debt whore. And after the war started, after Crimea and the war in Donbass started getting a lot worse. So they needed to start redoing a lot of their deals with these creditors. So they came to them and said, hey, okay, guys, if our economy starts doing better, it's going to really give you better returns. That's the GDP warrants. Essentially, if the GDP increases by X amount, then that's good for you. But I'm sure you can see the issue here, because when your GDP falls 29%, it's quite easy to make it grow after that. It's like, when it's so low, even like minimal extra activity makes it grow. So they're kind of getting destroyed by that. So that's the reason they wanted, but they were not able to get rid of it. But a lot of things are coming to a headway in 2027. All of these big loans that they had outstanding, all the countries there, all of the G7 countries minus Italy agreed that is called the Group of Creditors of Ukraine, agreed for moratorium until 2027, but debt is still accruing. It's not like, oh, well, we're going to pause it completely. No, that's still accruing. So they still have to pay whatever is going to happen. It's as if the loan still exists. They're just pushing out when the first thing comes. And even if we look at, like I said, the $50 billion fund, which is supposedly supposed to be backed by Russian assets, which, by the way, hasn't really worked out the way they wanted it to, it also goes until 2027. And the IMF program that's been outlined for Ukraine also envisions zero financing from their official donors in 2027. And even if we take a look at IMF loans, they're essentially having to pay the exact same amount as they're getting, simply due to the interest that they've accrued over the years. So even discounting for the fact that we're going to talk about in a second, about industry, about the lack of taxpayers, about the lack of revenues from exports, even if everything went back magically to normal, and they had a mass inflow of Ukrainians who came back, they still have one of the most difficult debt challenges of all time, because they've been like, maybe you guys have had a friend, maybe you guys, it's like in the mafia movies, okay? There's, oh, I just need one more week, I just need one more week. But, of course, the mafia is not like, oh, okay, that's okay. Maybe they give them one more week, but, it's going to be much more costly in that week. And they keep making more and more and more and more costly. So 2027, even if, let's say, the war ended magically during this space, all the Ukrainians started coming back. Chinese companies started pouring in with the construction reinvestment. People were building stuff. It was great. There was watermelon sala factories. Maybe even rebuilding Azovstal. Even then, the amount of money they have to repay is simply just going to eat so much into their budget, and their budget is not a sustainable one, because it's essentially the size of budgets of countries with much larger GDPs than them. But we'll get to that later. But even discounting the loans parts, coming back to what I was saying earlier, as less people are there and more people are mobilized, you're going to see more and more, how would I say, carnage in Ukraine. Because the thing is, people now are already complaining about public works failing. There is sewage occasionally spilling into the streets. And, this can happen in any country. And this happens in Europe, this happens in Russia all the time. But it's happening very, very frequently in Ukraine. And it's taking a long time to fix it, simply because these public works companies, they are operating at such a low level because it's hard to get them funding, and also a lot of their skilled workers have either run away or they're dead, or they're currently serving. And as you see more and more of that, right, there's going to be a breakdown in many relationships that you see exist in Ukraine. Okay, this company produces this, and that comes to that. It's already happening. And as there's less and less workers, as less and less money is coming towards that, as less and less foreign money is coming in through exports, and less investment can happen, it's only going to make it more and more and more difficult. And so as we move into 2027, I really cannot see any positive trends, because some people have been pointing to the fact that, oh, well, there is a new normal in the metallurgical industry because they are now producing more than they were in 2020, end of 2022, and more in 2023, and actually they're exporting more grain than they were in some periods of the deal. But that's nowhere. But guys, regarding the metallurgical industry, they are still producing at a fraction of the level of 2021. They simply cannot produce more because they've lost Azovstal, they've lost Ilyich, which are two separate institutions in Mariupol alone, and they've had their other stuff bombed. And that doesn't even look at the amount of workers. So if they are bragging that this is their new normal, guys, even with the level of production and no war, other than the quiet conflict, somewhat quiet conflict on Donbass, relatively quiet conflict, they were not able to pay these loans. Why would they be able to pay these loans when they are essentially producing and exporting a fraction of what they were in 2021? It's when people make this point that, oh, Ukraine is producing more than they, yeah, it's like, yeah, they're doing better than absolute shit. Now they're doing almost absolute shit. Like, so guys, when you see that point being made, I want you to understand it in context that they're already doing bad prior to the war, and now they are doing slightly better than they were at the end of 2022. Guys, if this is a new normal, then they are completely screwed. And to continue on, demographics. Now, why demographics is so dangerous is because, I mean, there was an article today about the lonely women in Ukraine. And Kinyas and I, if you guys don't know him, please give him a follow after this. Most of you guys in here, I think, follow him, have really been tracking the births in Ukraine. Ukraine currently is on track for 170,000 births in the year of 2024. For reference, guys, in 1991, it was 630,000. From 630,000 at independence to 170,000 today. And, a lot of people will say, well, Russia and other countries are way down in births. You're 100% right when you're saying that. However, Russia is at the level they were in 2000. Ukraine's level in 2000, even at the height of the 90s, was 385,000. We're at 170,000, less than half of where it was, because Ukraine did see a rebound in 2000 up until 2011, where it reached all the way back up to 520,000, but only for it to plummet right back to where it is. And guys, the reason for this is obvious. Many women have left, and the women that have stayed cannot find a mate usually because many men are off at war or many men are stressed. And the other problem with this is, okay, listen, it's very unlikely that these kids are going to be fighting this war. I don't think it's going to last 15 years because, I mean, the whole point of this space is that Ukraine cannot last that long. It's quite obvious. But it speaks to the absolute level which Ukraine will be in a few years. You guys might have heard of the UN report. It recently came out a few weeks ago that Ukraine's population might drop to 15 million in the year 2100. I actually took a look, and that's actually optimistic. You might think, well, 15 million from 52 million to 15 million in a century. How's that optimistic? That's catastrophic. They were assuming a level over 200,000 births. We are at 170,000 births, and it's not rebounding at all. It's not like the metallurgic, which saw a small rebound effect. No. It's only going down. And honestly, it could be less than 170,000, and it could be like 165, somewhere there. But it's on track to be 170,000. And the other big issue with the demographics right now is because all these young kids left, when we're talking about the mobilization pool, there's more people going into the pension than there are getting into mobilization age. You guys see the issue now. Not only is Ukraine going to have to pay for more people who are getting mobilized, but now they have to pay even more for the new people who have to get their pensions. And they're not even getting the necessary amounts in most cases. So they're having to pay more in pensions, have to pay for people with disabilities, have to pay for new soldiers, and they have to keep doing this. And we think the budget now is bad, but they have to keep paying for more people who are falling onto pensions. They have to keep paying for people with disabilities who have got injured throughout the war. They have to keep paying for every new soldier that falls in. So it's not like, okay, when they talk about mobilization, we'll just mobilize more guys. Not only is that not practically possible because there's only X amount of men you can train, there's only X amount of people with the proper credentials, with the proper experience, with the proper knowledge to be able to train these guys. There's only X amount of facilities that they can bring to be able to train these guys. It's a compounding effect on the budget because you want to keep the same size military, but you have to pay more because guys, all these guys that are dead that you're replacing, all these guys that are keyboards, they have the artificial limbs, you have to keep paying the families. You have to keep paying for that. And now you're bringing on these new guys, so it's a compounding effect. So they're already having issues with the budget. They're already having to source most of the budget from elsewhere, take out these loans, and as I said, it's coming to a big reckoning in 2027. But now if they want to keep the same amount, they have to pay even more. And with a smaller and smaller pool, and about that smaller pool, well, as I said, they're around 20%. Guys, if this war continues at the same pace, they are on track to reach the 30% number by 2027. There's no way the country will be able to keep going. It will be full on house chaos. We already seen the issues of COVID, about them, taking some young kids, the TCC, TSK, whatever you want to call it, taking the young kids into the recruitment centers. Guys, it's only going to be worse because, for the big part of the start of the war, a lot of mothers and grandmothers did feel a sense of patriotism that, hey, let's send off the kids to war. But now I think everyone's starting to kind of wake up to the music. It's not fully there because people are still a bit deranged, but they understand that, as they like to call it, the genetic pool of Ukraine, which must be maintained, that's in their constitution, that's looking less and less likely by the day. And even that is not the only issues. We also have to look at the material losses because, such a huge thing that is going on right now all across Twitter and YouTube and the news medium is that, well, listen, it is quite bad for Ukraine. All these issues I have brought up, the demographics, the mobilization potential, the economy, the current situation at the front. Yes, all of that is true. However, Russia will run out of material because they're losing so much and they're using it like brainless chickens. And then Ukraine will be able to start a big attack. Guys, do not believe this for a second. Because think about it. If Russia is experiencing these issues, what do you think Ukraine is? And the quick counterpoint is, well, they're getting stuff from the West. We'll talk about that. So as I said, Ukraine loses about 1.1 tanks a day. So about 1,000 or so tanks. Maybe it was called at 900 even. Guys, before the war, Ukraine had about, 700 active tanks. I mean, they've received about 600 tanks from the West, mainly T-72s from Czechia, Poland, and, some were sourced by the US and stuff. They received some Leos, Abrams, but that's about 100, and now they're getting some Leopard ones, which is, it's a joke. But a big point they always point to is that in the beginning of the war, is that they always say, well, Russia is the biggest supplier of the tanks, right? That Russia supplied over 500 tanks. That is true. Ukraine did capture about 500 tanks, but 490 of those were captured in the first 10 months. In the preceding following 2 years, they've been capturing, on average, less than one tank a month. That might sound unbelievable, but yes, we took a look. You can take a look at War Spotting, the Oryx. It's like It's kind of like the orcs, same general crowd. And take a look at the dates before January 1st, and then from January 1st to today. It's insane. So they're not getting new replenishments of tanks. And I went ahead and looked, okay, how many of these T-72 B3s, T-80 BVMs, they're using very, very, very little. It's unclear why. Perhaps they can't get them to work. Perhaps they were more damaged than let on in the photos. Perhaps they're using them for donor parts. It's very hard to say, but they cannot use a lot of them. And so they are not getting many tank deliveries. And so every single tank they lose every day is much more impactful than, I would say, 5 Russian tanks. That's the ratio they need to maintain, but they're not having that ratio right now. The ratio is 3.4 to 1.1. They need 5 or 6 to 1.1. Additionally, when it comes to artillery systems, guys, they're just getting destroyed beyond belief. I mean, before the Kharkov offensive, they were losing like they were losing on average like 3 a day. That is absolutely catastrophic. Over the whole war, Russia has been losing about 1.5 a day across MRLS, self-propelled, and towed. So it cannot be losing this. And the thing is, the West, unlike Russia, is primarily Air Force military, right? They believe in air power. So it's not like there's a billion systems waiting in some random place they can get. No, guys, they're going to run out probably mid-2025. And so they are going to be in 2027. They're going to be using artillery very sparingly, only defensively, and they can't be using it to push an initiative or anything like that, even if Russia somehow magically runs out of everything. So that's the reason why currently we're seeing the big F-16 push, because the only way that they'll be able to get the initiative somehow and attack, you need artillery to do it. Well, the only viable alternative to that is to use air power. So that's the reason why we're seeing such a big F-16 push. And guys, we know how this is going to turn out. So all in all, we saw that 2030 video. We saw how it is. But if we actually take a look and see every single aspect, the situation at the front, the economic situation, the demographic situation, the material source situation, the mobilization situation, and we compare how it is today to where it is trending to in the next couple of years, we see that this is just a numbers game. And it's not one factor that's done, it's not two factors, it's minimum 5 factors that are all pointing in the same direction. So even if, guys, let's say, my analysis is being clouded by, just my judgment and my biases, it has to be very, very clouded in many directions. Because, Ukraine in 2030, I think honestly, following the war, it is going to have a population less than 20 million. It's going to be by far the poorest country in Europe. And it's honestly a tragedy, guys. But they brought this among themselves, and this is where the war has been headed to. That the fact that they did not sign any deals in 2022 when they could have, when they had much more leverage, is going to come back to bite them. Their only chance is to sign a deal by the end of the year. Maybe they can justify it by saying they're afraid of Trump or something along those facts. It really doesn't matter. Because the longer this goes, even if, let's say, they magically gain the initiative for a little bit, all these compounding factors, it cannot allow for a victory in the way they want. Russia would just keep going. And yes, someone can make a parallel space about this in Russia, but as we know, Russia is a much larger country. Their births, for example, even when they fell a lot, are still 7.5 times higher than Ukraine's births in the same time period. 7.5. It's not like they have a 7.5 times bigger population, but it's trending that way. So yeah, that's it, guys. That's Ukraine 2027. Not a very pretty picture if you're a supporter of Ukraine, but that's how it is. So listen, if anyone wants to add a comment or ask a question, feel free to do that. But that's really the majority of the points I wanted to make today. So thank you guys for listening. All right, yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Uh, so regarding the deal that Ukraine did with the debtors, uh, I mean you elaborated on the GDP warrants, but whatever happened to the rest? So they had a lot of uh, debt to externals, and I tried to look up what was it they agreed on, but I didn't really find too much useful info on that.
Yeah, so regarding the deal, I'm not 1,000% sure if it's fully ratified by the majority of the bondholders, but essentially, they wanted about a 60% haircut. They are getting about a 42.5% haircut. And I believe it is a conditional haircut. So it's not going to be fully written off, but it could be written off given Ukrainian commits to certain kinds of actions in the future. So, yes, they still have to pay the remaining percent. Interest is still accruing. The loan total is still going to be really almost more or less the same. And they're going to have to start making payments. I'll be able to message you later. I had an article. I read this article not too long ago about when they will start have to make payments on this loan, but it's something that will have to be factored into the budget, and they will have to make these payments eventually. So it's not fully written off. Um, Partial is conditionally partially written off given Ukraine meets certain requirements. But as we know from the other creditor deals, this is very unlikely to happen, and they're only going to have to keep milking Ukraine more and more. If you want to kind of listen to what are some options the West can do regarding non-payment and regarding how they can go about it, well, you can listen to my other space, the kind of stuff they make them do. I mean, for example, they created what's called NABU, which is the anti-corruption stuff for Ukraine, and they forced the Ukrainians to use a specific software, I think built in America, for all of their official government purchases. And essentially, most of the stuff they buy is Western sourced. So the money is not going back into their economy. So they're essentially saying, "Hey, you have to buy our stuff with your tax dollars to fight corruption," or something like that. So that's one example of a way that they get their money back, even though they're fairly certain Ukraine will not be able to pay in the traditional paying off a loan sense.
Okay. And regarding the mobilization, you did say a lot of things about it, but is it known, like since they enacted the mobilization law earlier this year, is it known or is it published how many people were they actually able to mobilize? Because I only saw the numbers of like how many people registered into that system, but how many? So in terms of force generation, how many were they able to get in the AFU?
So right now the number they're saying, this is what they're saying, and I believe it, is about 1,000 a day. So they're saying about 30,000 a month, and they were saying that in December, it was about a third, so they were getting about 10,000 a month. So, but I'm going to tell you that this is not so this is not so shocking because the overall rate is about 1.1 thousand a day. It was just the initial mobilization push is way higher than what we are seeing now. So this is actually just returning to the average daily thing. It's just there was a time period where it did fall by a bit. They're just returning back to that number. So I think what they're doing is they're trying to match what they believe to be the Russian numbers, which is about 1,000 volunteers and 1,000 contracts being signed a day. I think they're trying to match that. I think that's their goal.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, guys. Anyone else want to hop in? If not, thank you so much for listening. I mean, hopefully, this gave, I would say, at least a somewhat good idea of the confidence of Teamwork Criminal. I was really, if I'm going to be honest, just rehashing many conversations I had with some guys that are even in this space. But for anyone else who wants to listen, thank you to the people who are here right now, and for the people who are listening afterwards, whether this is on YouTube or on my timeline. It's just to kind of cue you in as to the conversations we've been having, the data we've been looking at, so you understand the place of confidence. So thank you guys, and have a good day.